Hey guys, here's another one of the stories from the Sinister podcast. After you've listened to this one, why don't you actually pick up the podcast? Because there's at least an hour of footage you haven't heard yet. Check the links in the description and get it either on iTunes or wherever you use RSS feeds, or just download it on my website, surrey.me. As I made my way through the cold concrete tunnels leading down to the bunker's entrance, I felt an unusual sense of anxiety coursing through me. Though I'm not claustrophobic, I felt as if the tunnel's thick grey walls wanted to swallow me whole. An eerie wind blew down the corridor, its ominous howl adding to my nervousness. There was no real reason for me to be afraid in that moment, but in hindsight, I should have followed my instincts and turned back. I went farther down until I reached the bunker's only point of entry, a 14-inch thick metal door, kept ajar to show off its awe-inspiring mass to visitors. I touched the solid surface, my mouth gaping at its incredible strength. This door, and the structure to which it was attached, was designed to withstand a nuclear blast. It was hard not to feel both humbled and somewhat inadequate in front of the unyielding and robust door. I stepped over the wide threshold and entered the facility. On my left were decontamination showers, and to my right were concrete walls covered in chipped paint of a putrid green pastel tone, typical of the late 50s. Beyond a short corridor sat a lovely young woman in a small souvenir shop. She was typing away on an ancient machine with an old CRT monitor. I approached her, smiled, and explained I had come for the guided tour. She beamed at me and motioned to a group standing in the hallway to her left. It had been a blisteringly cold winter day, so I was not entirely surprised by the low turnout. In fact, I was grateful. The 5 other visitors and I would get a chance to visit the decommissioned nuclear bunker without stepping on each other's toes. And our guide's attention wouldn't be divided between an overabundance of patrons. Ignoring the distracting hum of the old neon lights flickering above, I waited for the guided tour to begin. While the other guests exchanged idle banter to pass the time, I played solitaire on my phone. Soon, a man dressed in mock camouflage strolled down the corridor and stepped in front of us. He introduced himself as our tour guide and escorted us to our first stop, the infirmary. We were packed into the tiny room like sardines. As I stood there, squeezed between the wall and an older married couple, the tour guide started giving a quick history lesson. Karp's Genfen bunker had been built during the Cold War under the prevalent threat of a nuclear strike. Run by a military crew of around 500, the bunker's main function was to house political leaders in case of a nuclear offense against Canada. The bunker had been operational from 1961 to 1994, when it was finally decommissioned. It was later turned into a Cold War museum. My friend Jacob had told me about it, back in college, and wholeheartedly recommended I visit the underground facility. It had taken me a few years, but I had finally gotten around to it. The tour featured various historically significant rooms scattered across the bunker's 4 separate levels. The levels were numbered in reverse order, Level 4 being closest to the surface, and Level 1 being deepest underground. When asked about rations while visiting the cafeteria on Level 2, the guide playfully suggested that they were top-notch gourmet cuisine. 1 floor down, he showed us a freezer, where a body bag lay on the top shelf. The guide explained that, during lockdown, the freezer doubled as a morgue to keep the bodies from decomposing. He then pointed out a box of genuine army rations that dated back to the 80s. It was on a shelf beneath the fake corpse. We were shown the machinery room, the CBC studio, the Bank of Canada vault, and other interesting areas. Once the tour came to an end, we were allowed to roam free and explore the facility. It was my second opportunity to leave the bunker unscathed, and I kicked myself for not having gone home at that point. I could have returned to my life, being left nothing but good memories. Unfortunately, I stayed. It was 12:30 p.m., giving me ample time to explore every crevice of the bunker before closing time at 4. Armed with a map of all 4 levels, I headed off on my own. The map was a little hard to follow, so I soon stuck it in my backpack full of snacks and relied solely on my sense of direction. The result? I got turned around so many times that I kept losing track of which level and section I was in. Fortunately, there were arrows on the floor that led visitors to the bunker's only stairwell. In the machinery room on level 1, I spotted a panel in the wall behind a large device. Curious, I opened it and peeked inside. I nearly died of fright when a man wearing a gas mask and hazmat suit looked back down at me. I shrieked, falling back in fear. It took me several moments to regain my composure, but I eventually did and realized I was looking at a dummy. I was relieved no one was around to witness the scene. Probably looked like a moron. Gazing at the unmoving figure, I felt goosebumps running up and down my spine, as though my very instincts refused to believe the man wasn't real. Nearing the intended end of my visit, I spotted an open hatch in the floor behind the staircase. The number on the wall clearly indicated I was on level 1, the lowest level, so I was confused to see a hole in the ladder that dropped further down. My curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself firmly gripping the ladder and descending into the mysterious sublevel. A cloud of dust welcomed me when I set my feet on the darkened floor. Only the red emergency neons were on, providing me with barely enough light to see a sign on the wall that read Level 0. Though I had the distinct impression visitors were not allowed here, I excitedly began investigating. Where previous floors had been staged with props, Level 0 seemed to contain genuine artifacts. Top-secret file folders, dirty mugs, scattered documents, staplers so old they looked more like murder weapons than office supplies, and outdated world maps. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but a little dirt wouldn't deter me. Most puzzling of all was that every clock on Level 0 had stopped at the same exact time, 12:35 p.m. My expedition of the uncharted level continued until an alarm I had set on my watch rang to warn me that the bunker was about to close. I hurried down the main corridor, attempting to find the hatch through which I had snuck in. Unfortunately, due to the confusing layout and identical-looking hallways, I got lost. By the time I reached the hatch, it was 1:15 closing, and I found it shut and locked from the outside. Panic soon began to set in, and I frantically banged on the hatch for over an hour in the hopes that an employee would walk by doing the rounds and would hear my pleas. My arms and legs quivering from holding on to the ladders for so long, I finally resigned myself to my fate. I was going to have to spend a night in the bunker, alone, with barely any light. I should have been terrified, but I was actually a little excited. I had plenty of food, I always packed too much. I ran out of snacks once on a field trip and vowed never to make the same mistake again. Besides, I had my phone to keep me busy. This far underground, I wouldn't have a signal, but I could play with my apps. Night 1. The evening started quietly enough. After making my way to a large boardroom, I reached into my bag for the small meal I had packed to keep myself from getting grumpy on the long ride home. Once my stomach was satisfied, I began sneaking a peek at the documents left on the table. Although they seemed like sensitive military papers, they had been discarded as though in a hurry. It surprised me. The army had a reputation of being overly tidy, Why was the entire floor in disarray? In fact, the more I looked around level 0, the more things seemed out of place. There were jackets left hanging on the boardroom chairs, bags in the barracks, playing cards laid out mid-game on the tables of a small break room, and various objects scattered around, as though the level had been evacuated in a hurry. Hopefully not because of asbestos. I didn't want to breathe in that poison all night. I pushed that worry aside, since there was nothing I could do about it. I was trapped, alone, isolated from the outside world. It was still early in the evening, and the forgotten top-secret documents seemed like just what I needed to entertain myself. So, I used my phone as a flashlight and tried to read them. I say I tried to, because what was written on them was beyond me. They were full of mathematical symbols I had never seen before, and really complicated quantum physics-worthy science lingo. It didn't take long for me to give up and start playing with my phone. Time in the secluded bunker passed remarkably fast. Soon, drowsiness crept in. I gathered my things and wandered through the cold corridors until I found a sleeping area. After a fair amount of swatting, I managed to clear dust off of an old green cot and settled in for the night. It had been a long day of exploring and going up and down the bunker's many stairs, so I was exhausted. I dozed off almost as soon as my head hit the cot's hard mesh surface. I awoke to the most offensive sounds to ever reach my ears. Inhuman yowls came pouring in from the level above. Heart leaping out of my chest, I jerked into a seated position and checked my watch. It was barely 1 a.m., and I had only had a few hours of sleep. The screams, muffled by the thick concrete ceiling that separated me from their source, continued almost non-stop at different intensities and from various screams. Soon, the sound of stomping footsteps accompanied the screams. Adrenaline flooded my system, pulling sleep out from under me. In that instant, my mind went blank, and all I could do was quiver with fear in the semi-dark room. I was no longer alone in the bunker. Yet my primal instinct screamed for me to stay concealed. I was actually thankful that there was a locked hatch protecting me from what was causing the ungodly sounds on level 1. The tormented moans and incessant stomping continued all through the night, ensuring that I wouldn't escape to the sweet embrace of a dreamscape. Never in my life had I felt such animalistic fear. Little did I know that my torment had merely begun. Day 2. The rampage came to an end after a few hours, but I stayed perfectly still long after the last scream faded away into a silent void. Too afraid to move, I keep my eyes on my watch. I waited as an hour and a half ticked by at a painfully slow pace, as though I was in the last class on Friday afternoon, waiting for the bell to ring. Come morning, I imagined the warm and welcoming sunrise taking place outside. Yet as I sat under the industrial glow of the deserted bunker's red neon lights, the only thing I felt rising was my anxiety. I'm not sure what finally compelled me to move, but I eventually gathered enough courage to get to my feet. The facility was going to open in 2 hours, and I didn't want to stay a second longer than necessary. In trying to find my way out, I got lost in the dizzying hallways. I stumbled on a room I hadn't seen before. It was a small library, crowded with dozens of bookshelves, which has been knocked over to form a makeshift set of stairs that lead up to a secondary hatch in the ceiling. I should have known there was more than one exit. Cursing my stupidity, I climbed the unsteady pile of metal bookshelves and examined the hatch. This one locked from the inside. Its broken-off ladder explained the improvised stairs at my feet. Without a second to waste, I gripped the cold wheel and tried to turn it. No luck, it was stuck. Taking a deep breath, I doubled my efforts and put all my force into it. grunting like a muscle man at the gym. The irritating sound of metal on metal let me know that my efforts were paying off. The feeling I felt once the hatch opened was comparable to that of a drowning man's first breath as he finally breaks the water's surface. Using what little strength I have left, I pulled myself up to level 1. Everything looked exactly like I had left it. No signs of the screaming ghouls I had heard overnight. Following the directional arrows on the floor, I reached the stairwell and climbed to the top floor. It was around 7:30 AM when I reached level 4. The bunker's guided tours were scheduled to start at 8 AM, so I assumed I would find a couple of employees preparing for their day. To my surprise, level 4 was empty. The massive blast door, visible from the souvenir shop where I stood, was closed and locked. The previous night's adrenaline having run its course, exhaustion took over. I knew the guided tour started in the infirmary. With half an hour to kill, I decided to take a nap on a hospital bed, assuming one of the guides would come along at any moment and rouse me from my sleep. I climbed onto one of the beds, closed my eyes, and fell into slumber's welcoming arms. My stomach woke me after what felt like only minutes of rest. Its malcontent growls reminded me of the demonic noises I had heard coming from level 1. I reached for a granola bar and checked the time. It was 5:13 PM, which meant the bunker was closed. How could that be? How had I slept through a full day's worth of tours? Why had none of the guys woken me up? I bounced to my feet and ran to the main entrance. The blast door was sealed shut. My mind raced, splitting blame and anger between myself and the heartless employees that had locked me in again. The thought of spending another night in the bunker was more than I could bear. I needed to leave immediately. I checked my cell phone, barely having enough time to confirm that I had no signal before the battery died. Even on the bunker's highest level, there would have been no way for me to get a call out. I didn't lose hope though. I had seen plenty of phones throughout the facility. Keeping my panic at bay, I started hunting one down to call for help. With newfound confidence and purpose, I navigated through the maze and found a boardroom with several rotary phones at my disposal. Not wasting a second, I picked one up and put the receiver to my ear. No dial tone. I groaned and ducked under the table to see if it had gotten disconnected somehow. To my dismay, I found that the cords of every phone in the room dangled under the desk, their tips fused with a rubber cap. They were merely museum props. As I stood up and turned to leave the room, I spotted something that chilled me to the bone. There were 6 clocks hanging above the door, each listing a different time zone. Just like the docks on level 0, every single clock had stopped working at 12:35 PM, or the equivalent in its corresponding time zone. I rushed out of the boardroom, shaking the goosebumps off of me. Hoping to find a real phone elsewhere, I began searching the remaining rooms. Though I came across machines, both modern and old, none of them were connected to a phone jack. With every failure, despair's bony fingers dug into me, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Had none of my friends or family noticed that I was missing? How much longer was I going to be trapped in here? It seemed like I had no choice but to spend another night in my prison. Night 2. In a quest to keep myself busy, I aimlessly roamed through the underground lair. Its abandoned rooms, though brightly lit by the overhead lights, had somewhat of a sinister feel to them. It was as though the shadows within wanted to consume me. Later, while looking for a washroom on level 3, I came across a security office. I peeked into the narrow room and saw 2 monitors displaying live feeds from various security cameras on the premises. On the wall was a list of channels and their corresponding cameras. I stepped inside and took a seat on the computer chair in front of the desk. For the first time since I had gotten trapped, I truly and honestly felt safe. I rolled to the door, shut and locked it just in case. It was then that I noticed the phone on the wall. I practically jumped for joy. It was plugged in. I picked up the receiver. This was, after all, a functioning room and not part of the exhibit. I picked up the receiver, trembling in anticipation as I brought it to my ears. A hum. Oh, the glorious sound of a dial tone! It sang to me like a choir of angels piercing through the dark clouds that hung over me since I stepped foot in the bunker. I called the only number that seemed logical at the time, 911. As I waited, I feverishly munched down my last remaining snack. Never in my life had the sound of a connecting call brought me such joy. I heard the clicking sound of someone picking up. Just knowing I was going to hear someone else's voice made me feel so much better, much less isolated. I didn't even wait for the scripted greeting. I blurted out in a frantic and disorganized manner everything that had happened. After a moment, it dawned on me that my conversation partner hadn't responded. I shut up and listened. The sound of static poured into my ear. With an exasperated sigh, I hung up and tried again. Static. I called my mum. Static. I called my friend. Static. I called each and every number I could remember. Static, static, static. It was pointless. The line must have gotten damaged. There was no getting through. I went from the height of ecstasy to the crippling valleys of hopelessness. As I sat in the security room, I flipped through the channels on the left monitor to pass time. All I could see were empty hallways and abandoned rooms, not a tour guide or janitor in sight. It was all the same, until I switched to channel 19. The room was pitch black, and I assumed its lights must have burned out. But then I read the text at the bottom of the screen. Offline. I checked the legend next to me on the wall, curious to know which camera had gone down. I felt a chill when I saw it. Channel 19. Outdoor camera 1. I don't know why it frightened me so much. Security cameras probably break down all the time. Still, being unable to see what was going on out there made me feel even more isolated from the outside world. Of all the cameras that could have broken down, why that one? Was it a coincidence? I yearned to catch the smallest glimpse of life outside the bunker. I watched the dead feed for hours, hoping that, by some miracle, it would start working again. Darkness was all I saw. All of a sudden, a loud sound boomed through the air vents. Someone or something was screaming. It sounded like the groans of a wounded animal begging to be put down. Though I wanted nothing more than to cover my ears and wait it out, I grabbed the remote and started flipping through the channels. What I saw will stay with me until I draw my final breath. On the feed showing the contamination showers was a grotesque figure of a man. He sat on the floor, face half melted, pulling out clumps of hair and scalp. He screamed in tormented agony. Suddenly, the man jumped to his feet and began throwing himself against the wall repeatedly. I realized the security office must have been directly below the showers, because I was able to hear every terrible noise made whenever his body hit the hard surface. The sound of the impact, the screams, the crackling of bones. My body trembled with fear and pity. There was nothing I could do. I could only watch. Watch as the wounded man started tearing his shirt off. The fabric had become fused to him, and as he pulled, chunks of his skin came off with it. The rest of his exposed body was covered in massive blisters. I gasped at the sight. The stranger fell to the floor, curled up in the fetal position, and continued to bellow in writhing agony. After a few minutes, water began gushing out of the multiple shower heads lining the walls, pouring over the damaged man from every direction. Static overtook the screen, and when it faded, the man was gone. I felt like I was going to break. My chest was so tight that I could barely breathe. While one eye watched the empty showers, which now trickled at a weaker flow, the other eye scanned the second TV set, where I flipped from channel to channel, hoping to see where the man had gone. I never found a single trace of him. He had seemingly vanished into thin air. I didn't sleep that night. My terrified mind refused to let me drop my guard, so I continued to watch the security cameras until morning. Day 3. I was starving. I hadn't eaten a proper meal in over a day, and I'd run out of snacks. A cocktail of fear and hunger kept my body in a permanently shaky state. It was 6 a.m., and though the horrible visions of the burned man stayed in my mind, I had to compartmentalize my fears to survive. No longer distracted by terror, my stomach urged me to provide it with something to eat. I immediately thought about a bowl of fruit I had seen in the mess hall. Though I didn't want to leave my safe haven, I needed food. The cafeteria was 1 floor down on level 2, and I felt comfortable enough to find my way there and back in time to come across the staff as they showed up for work. If nothing else, I had had the chance to explore the facility quite well during my imprisonment, and I was getting familiar with its layout. Propping my chair between the doors and its frame, I ventured off to find much-needed nourishment. I was relieved when I made it to the mess hall without incident, but my celebration was short-lived. The moment my fingers clutched one of the apples in the fruit basket, I knew something was off. The texture was all wrong, yet I still lifted it to confirm my suspicions. It was just a hollow plastic decoration. My stomach roared violently, but coming up with a solution had become impossibly difficult. My lack of sleep, coupled with the hunger, cast a heavy fog over my mind, numbing my reasoning skills to that of a houseplant in need of water. I sat at one of the tables and wept like a child. Then, a memory came to the forefront of my mind. In the freezer, the tour guide had pointed out a box of army rations. I knew they were old, certainly expired, and would probably taste like paper, but my stomach wouldn't care. It just wanted food, regardless of format or flavor. Before leaving the mess hall, I checked every cupboard to ensure I hadn't missed a secret food cache. It was during my quick inspection that I noticed the large analog clock hanging on the back wall. It read 12:35 p.m. like all the others I had encountered. It couldn't have been a coincidence. Maybe it had some sort of army-specific significance? Maybe it was the exact time when the Cold War officially ended? I hadn't read about the clocks on any of the many plaques in the museum, so all I could do was make wild and unsubstantiated guesses. Once again, my stomach gurgled, snapping me back to the real world. It was time to find the freezer. 1 level down, I recalled. Having to constantly go up and down stairs was irritating. I could only imagine the frustration felt by the bunker's staff, who had to do it on a daily basis. Weakened by hunger, I half-heartedly descended the steep and unforgiving stairs to level 1. My anxiety returned as I remembered the sounds I had heard coming from this floor on my first night. It doubled when I noticed dozens of dirty footprints on the floor. Though most showed the outline of army boots, a few were shaped like bare feet. One such trail led directly to the body bag in the freezer. My anxiety tripled when I realized that there were no footsteps leading out of the room, only those going in. Alas, the only box of rations in the entire bunker just happened to have been stored on the shelf directly beneath the fake corpse. When I had first visited the room during the guided tour, the human-shaped bag had given me the creeps. There were no words of comfort that could have put the fear in my throbbing heart at bay as I looked at the silhouette. I found myself lacking in courage but the desperation for nourishment won out against the terror. Closing my eyes tightly, I braced myself, approached the shelf, and reached for the large cardboard box under the corpse. I heard the crinkling and crackling of plastic. The bag moved. I was sure of it. I emitted a dog-like whine and grabbed the box as quickly as my quivering fingers could move, not opening my eyes for fear that I would find the body sitting up, and what little bravery I had left in me would spiral away like bathwater down the drain. I could picture the burnt man's reddened and melting hand slowly unzipping the bag, though I heard no such sound. It felt as though there was another presence in the room with me. I felt its very life force, its soundless breathing, its oppressive aura. I held the box of rations with all my might, turned around and ran out of the room, only opening my eyes once the door snapped shut behind me. On my way back to the security room, I pried open the box and grabbed the first envelope within reach, ripping it open to reveal dehydrated berries and oatmeal. Though the facility was full of water fountains, I had no kettle with which to boil the water, and found myself too hungry to care. I cocked my head back, brought the envelope to my lips, and poured the contents into my mouth. It didn't taste as bad as I expected, but it was far from good. My stomach grunted happily, and energy quickly came surging through my veins, allowing me to quicken my pace so I could reach my safe haven as soon as possible. These rations could last me at least a month, I realized, shuddering at the possibility. There was no way I was going to spend another day, let alone a month, in the haunted bunker. Despite my conviction, I held on to the box of food like a security blanket. When I reached the security room on level 3, I was stunned to find the door closed. I could have sworn I propped it open to avoid that exact problem. I reached for the cold metal handle and attempted to open the door. It was locked. My immediate thought was that a supernatural force was behind it, but reason and logic, lagging behind, reminded me that my detour to the freezer had taken me past opening time, and that one of the guides must have closed the door while giving his first tour. A sigh of relief escaped my lips. I made my way to the top floor while wolfing down a second serving of rations. Level 4 was empty. No operator in the gift shop, no tour guides, no guests waiting in the hallway. The blast door, in all its splendor, remained closed, as though mocking me. It was 8:30, how could I be alone? The museum's website clearly indicated they were open every day, even on holidays. Were they starting tours later than I thought? With no other option, I walked to the infirmary and reclaimed the hospital bed from the previous day. My fingers grazed along the sides of my cell phone, wishing I hadn't wasted its battery on stupid games. Even if it was useless underground, I wanted to hear another person's voice. Anything would do, even my saved voicemails, as long as it was proof that I wasn't alone in the world. Never in my life had solitude weighed down on me as hard and as relentlessly as it did while I was waiting in that medical room. I waited and waited as 1 hour went by, then 2, then 3. There were no signs of life. Each lonely second in the isolated bunker brought me one step closer to a depression-laced meltdown. Where was everyone? My eyes snapped open and I rushed to check the time. 9 p.m.? Oh, I'd done it again. I'd fallen asleep and missed my only opportunity to flee my confinement. I had no time to mourn my freedom, because I realized what stirred me awake. Reality came crashing down on me when I identified the sounds of someone breathing heavily in the adjoining room. I was no longer alone, yet a twisting feeling in my gut made me wish I was. As the unnatural and mechanical breathing neared, I fled like a frightened child to the closet, leaving only a crack to see what was approaching. A tall man wearing a hazmat suit walked into the infirmary, his face concealed behind a gas mask. Based on his strong stance and choice of footwear, I could tell this was an army man. His movements were stiff and heavy, as though he was walking through thick jello. With each step closer to me, my heart pounded faster and faster, to the point that I was afraid it was going to give out. A shriek down the hall made the stranger's head snap away from my location. He took off running towards the source of the sound, clutching a gun tightly between his hands. I could hear someone's desperate footsteps in the distance. A gunshot. A gunshot so close that the sound resonated in my ears. My guts twisted as though a clown was trying to make a balloon animal out of them. Clearly, my instinct to hide had saved my life. The next few minutes melted together in a mental fog. A collection of screams emerged from multiple locations. More footsteps, more gunshots, fewer shrieks. A man threw himself in the infirmary, making an admirable impersonation of a howler monkey. I gasped when I saw the terrible condition the man was in. I quickly slapped my hand over my mouth to shut myself up. The stranger was dripping wet, covered in blood and blisters, not unlike the man I had seen in the showers. He looked lost, confused, in pain. Had I not been paralyzed with fear, I would have pulled him into the closet with me. Maybe I could have saved him from his horrible fate. I watched as the man in the gas mask rushed him, put the barrel of the gun against his mutilated face, and fired him, point blank. Grey matter and blood flew out from the poor man's head, coating both the closet door and my own face. There's nothing in the world more disturbing than the feeling of another man's warm blood against your skin. The man in the hazmat suit turned on his heels and exited the room, unceremoniously leaving the body inches from my feet. He was probably headed towards the distant screams coming from the other end of the facility. I didn't feel safe in my improvised hiding spot. I feared the gun-toting maniac would eventually find me and do away with me as heartlessly as he had done with the unfortunate corpse sprawled out on the infirmary floor. If I stayed put, I knew I'd be next. I had to take my chances and try to get back to level 0, where I hadn't seen anyone or anything. As quietly as I could, I pushed open the closet door, stepping over the body at my feet. I then navigated through the bunker's hallways, keeping all my senses on full alert. I ran away from the pained yowls, I avoided the corridors where I heard footsteps, and I dodged the areas where I could hear gunshots. I knew the man in the gas mask would be at the center of it all. He left dozens of bodies in his wake. As I was running towards my goal, just a few hallways away from reaching it, I felt something grab me by the ankle. I came crashing down, packets of rations flying off in every direction. Stifling a scream, I turned my head back to see what had tripped me. It was a woman. Like all the others, she was covered in pustules and burns. She had a gunshot wound to the eye that gushed blood like a geyser. The trajectory of the bullet had spared her from death, but had left her in a visible state of shock. Her mouth opened, and she shrieked louder than I thought physically possible. The veins on her throat bulged out from the force she was exerting. It was absolutely awful. The man in the gas mask would undoubtedly return to finish her off, so I wasted no time in kicking free of her desperate grasp. I got up shakily, giving her one last look, and then ran for safety. "Help!" she moaned, but I kept running. Another bang, another gunshot. Down the hallway, I turned to my left and entered the room with the secondary hatch. I climbed down to level 0, closed the hatch, and desperately locked it behind me. I could only hope that none of the monstrously deformed figures had sought refuge here, for fear... I could only hope that none of the monstrously deformed figures had sought refuge here, for fear they would alert the killer to my presence. Fortunately, I could only hear the welcomed silence of a perpetually deserted floor. I could still make out the distant, muffled noises of the madman and his prey. Though I felt like a coward, hiding in my rat hole, there was nothing I could do to help those people. What could one measly man do against a trained army-killing machine? I curled up in a dusty corner, sobbing as the night hours crept by. Day 4. My eyes stung. I'd been too afraid to blink at any point during the night. Bathing in the red hue of the security lights, I kept seeing those horrible images burned in my retinas. With every gunshot and scream, I felt myself sinking deeper and deeper into a bottomless pit of psychological distress. How much longer could I hold out until my mind snapped in two? I rocked back and forth to lull my nerves. The noises finally ceased around 4 a.m., but I didn't move from my den. Just when I was about to lose all hope, I heard a familiar metallic sound coming from a few rooms over. It was the hatch. Not the one in the overturned room, but the one I had first used to enter level 0. Hesitantly, I approached the hatch and watched as light came pouring in. If the man in the gas mask was on the other side, then I would accept my fate. At that point, I welcomed the sweet release of death. It seemed much more appealing to me than staying trapped in isolation. Excuse me, you're not supposed to be down there, warned a young man. It was the tour guide. I recognized his voice. Never in my life had I been so happy to see another person's face. The boy helped me up and scolded me for breaking into a restricted area. I ignored his words, focusing instead on the joy of being in front of a normal, breathing, living being. Oh, I could have hugged him if it wouldn't have made me seem like some kind of nut. He had me wait on level 1 while he climbed down to do something with the breaker box on level 0. Without questioning me, the guy escorted me out of the facility. We didn't come across a single body on the way out, and I didn't ask if he had seen any. The answer didn't matter to me. Getting out of the bunker was my only priority. The smell of fresh air was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, replacing the stagnant stench of the bunker's recycled oxygen. I lingered outside in the cold for longer than normal, then made my way to my car. I drove straight home, unwilling to make even the shortest of stops. I felt free and happy, the awful experience burying itself in the back of my mind. Day 11. It's been a week since I left the bunker. I thought I was free, but I was wrong. There's something wrong with this world. No one else seems to notice it. Even when surrounded by my peers, I feel so alone, so isolated. They can't relate to what I'm going through. I wish they knew what happened at 12:35 p.m. I wish at least one other person knew. Every day, it happens. Every damn day like clockwork. At 12:35 p.m., the whole world freezes, and the minute lingers for over an hour, sometimes more. I know, because my watch is the only one affected, and continues ticking by regardless. In this terrible non-hour, the world I know fades away. My family, my colleagues, and even strangers on the street all disappear. Buildings fall to ruin, some vanish, others look as though they were blasted to pieces, and others still stand but are slowly being eaten away by overgrowth. An eerie silence fills the air, leaving only the howling of the wind through the shattered windows of my office building. This is a world destroyed, where nothing inhabits the landscape. There are no humans, there are no birds, and there are no signs of life. Except for me. Then, as mysteriously as the wasteland appears, the minute expires, my world returns, its inhabitants none the wiser. Day 235. I can now confirm that this phenomena happens everywhere. I have traveled to Europe, Asia, Australia, South America, and even Africa. It happens at exactly 12:35 Eastern Time, no matter where I am. For over an hour every day, I am the only living creature on the face of the earth.